Last year's NFL draft saw 6 wide receivers taken in the first round. How many are going to go in 2021? We'll find out in just a couple of weeks. But before you go banking all that fantasy football draft capital on getting one of these rookie playmakers, you're going to want to check out some research by Michael Fabiano, who did an awesome job of really tracking the rookie performance and career trajectory for some of these wide receivers taken in the first round. Fabs, let's get to it. For starters, you went back to 2012 and you looked at the last eight or so seasons. What did you find in some of your research?
A lot of it was bad, Bill, actually. 35 wide receivers have been selected in the first round of the NFL draft since 2012. We go back to 2012 to 2016. There were not a lot of winners, right? Justin Blackmon, Michael Floyd, Kendall Wright, A.J. Jenkins was a first-round pick of the Niners. He never panned out. Tavon Austin. Cordero Patterson was a fantasy sleeper for one season, never really met expectations. You had that great 2014 class with Mike Evans and Odell Beckham Jr. and Brandon Cooks. Sammy Watkins was also in that class. Evans, I don't know that he's elite. He's knocking on the door. He has been. He's pretty close. Odell Beckham Jr. was an elite fantasy wide receiver in New York, no longer, unfortunately, with Cleveland. Brandon Cooks has been under the radar, very good in 4 of the last 5 seasons. So that class actually did well, but it's the outlier. 2015 to 2016. I mean, you're looking at Corey Coleman, Josh Doxson, Laquan Treadwell, Kevin White, who was hugely popular coming out of West Virginia, and he just could not avoid injuries. Brashad Perriman, Philip Dorsett. I mean, the only wide receiver who really met expectations in those years was Amari Cooper, who's been a star both with the Oakland Raiders and now the Dallas Cowboys. But ultimately, 2012 to 2016, outside of that 2014 class, there has not been a whole lot to like, Amari Cooper being that one exception.
How about more recently? Maybe the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen, again, a bunch of more receivers going in the first round. But I feel like the ones most recently, they haven't panned out even before the first 4 years that you mentioned. The last 4 years, those players were even worse.
The trend continues, right, Bill? So 2017 class, Corey Davis, Mike Williams, John Ross, not good. Not any one of the 3 has been a fantasy star. No top 25 finishes among them. Now, DJ Moore and Calvin Ridley came up next. They've both been good. Ridley emerged as a superstar last year. I don't know if Moore's ever going to be an elite fantasy wide receiver, but at least he's a very solid wide receiver too. But then you go to Marquise Brown and N'Keal Harry. I mean, those guys have done nothing, right? So, and I don't know that they're going to ever do anything. By the way, never pick a Patriots offensive skill position player in your fantasy draft who was picked in the first round because they have not had a lot of success there. Now, this past season, we saw some really good performances. Justin Jefferson had one of the great fantasy seasons of all time among rookie wide receivers. He had 1,400 yards as an NFL record for rookie wideouts. CeeDee Lamb was on pace to be a top 12 wide receiver before Dak Prescott got hurt. He ultimately finished 22nd. Still pretty good, right? But some of the other guys, Henry Ruggs, Brandon Ayuk showed flashes, but he wasn't a top 30 wide receiver. I think he's going to be great moving forward. But you only really had CeeDee Lamb and Jefferson who emerged as stars as rookies. Jerry Jeudy wasn't even a top 40 wide receiver, and he's getting an offense with a lot of mouths to feed there in Denver. So let's look at the numbers a little bit deeper, right? So out of the 2020 first rounders, really only 2 guys were consistently productive, and CeeDee Lamb wasn't as consistent in the second half of the season without Dak Prescott. And when you're looking overall at the last 8 years, right? So you've got guys who've been elite, and I would define Odell Beckham Jr. as elite. Nuke Hopkins has been elite. He wasn't great as a rookie, but every single season after that, he just got better and better and better. Now he's a top 5 wide receiver. Other than that, I mean, Mike Evans has been good, right? In some seasons, he's been very good. Amari Cooper's been good. Brandon Cooks has been good. Other than that, Bill, there's not a lot to write home about here, about these wide receivers. So we've got a great class coming in 2021. Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle. Those guys are all going in the first round without question. Some other guys that could go in the first round. You're talking about Kadarius Toney, Rashad Bateman, Rondale Moore. Terrence Marshall could be a first rounder. Maybe Elijah Moore is going to be a first rounder. But folks, if you look at the trend here, most of these players coming out that we're all in love with coming out of college, the vast majority of these guys if you look at the trend, are going to bust. I don't know that Chase will bust. I don't know that Smith will bust. Waddle, who knows, the injuries, we'll see, but he's a tremendously talented player. Just keep that in mind, though, folks, because when you've got your dynasty drafts coming up, I know these guys are going to be first-round picks, no question about that. When you've got your redrafts, you're going to want to go out and get some of these guys, and some of them, depending on where they end up, could be great. I mean, if Waddle ends up in Detroit, I mean, they have no one there at wide receiver, so maybe he's going to be a star. Who knows? Just keep in mind the trend of first-round wide receivers since 2012, which is when my research started. It's not been good at all.
A little bit of a warning there from Mr. Michael Fabiano about drafting wide receivers. He also did similar research on running backs and quarterbacks. You can check all of that research, and it's a great article, great read. Fantasy football season, we always say it never ends here at Sports Illustrated. So go check out that insight, si.com/fantasy.